And each of these arrangements we're going to be asking, are these statements such that you can say something about C and A with C as a subject and A as a what? Predicate, right? There's any conclusion. C as a subject and A as a predicate. Can you say necessarily that every C is A, or can you say necessarily that no C is A? Or can you say necessarily that some C is A, or say necessarily that some C is not A, right? Is there some statement, in other words, universal or particular, affirmative or negative, right? Being those four possibilities we have to describe opposition. Is there anything that is necessarily so because of these statements? Okay? Now, the complication arises because you got those same four possibilities for each of these statements in this arrangement. You have every B is A, no B is A, some B is A, some B is not A, right? And likewise you have four, what? They're down here. Every C is B, no C is B, some C is B, some C is not B. And you got four possibilities here and four there. How many possible combinations do you have in that arrangement?
16.
Yeah, it's not 4 plus 4, it's 4 times 4, right? Okay. You got 4 men and 4 women. How many possible marriages?
16 possible different ones.
Each one of the 4 men could possibly be married to one of these 4 women, right? So there's 16 possibilities, right? Okay. It's complicated, right? Okay. So in each figure there are 16 cases, or 16 moods they call them sometimes, in the Latin word modes, to be considered and ask the question, does anything with C as a subject and A as a predicate follow necessarily, right? Okay. And you'll find out in all 3 figures that in most cases nothing does follow. Okay? Bad for the most part. The good is rarely, huh? Okay? And sometimes when they speak of these 16, they'll speak of 4 cases where you have 2 universal statements, right? And 4 cases where you have 2 particular statements. And then 8 mixed cases where you have the first premise be universal and the second particular, or vice versa, right? Okay? So we're going to be considering those. And of course the most important ones to think about are the ones that have 2 universal statements. They're not the only ones where you have a syllogism. Now, as you might suspect, when you reason out things, you have to start with something that is obvious. Okay? And there is a couple of obvious things that will be found in the arrangements that are in fact a syllogism. Okay? And sometimes we call these 2 obvious things the set of all and the set of none, which fits more Aristotle's grammatical way of saying these things. So let's take these 2 principles and ask yourself, is this something that needs to be proven, or something that's kind of obvious if you understand it? This is the set of all. If A is said of all B, then A will be said of whatever B is said of. Okay? If animal, for example, is said of all dogs, right? Then whatever dog is said of, animal will also be said of, right? Okay? Now, is that statement here obvious, or is it in need of proof?
seems to be obvious.
Yeah. Notice, if B is said of something else, right, and that is not an A, right, then that B, as B is said of it is B, will not be an A, right? And that contradicts what you're given here, right? So if A is said of all B, then A will be said of whatever B is said. If B is said of all C, then A will be said of all C. If B is said of some C, then A will be said of some C. Yeah? Now you can state this another way grammatically. It fits more the way we're accustomed to do it now. But you could say, if every B is A, then whatever is a B is also an A. Okay? Now, if you understand what it means to say every B is an A, right? That's in the form of a universal affirmative statement, right? There's no exception, right? Every B is an A. If every B is an A, right? That's what you're saying in the antecedent there. If every B is an A, then whatever is a B must also be an A, right? Again, that's just stating the same principle here, but a little differently grammatically. Again, is that obvious? Yeah. You can see how to deny that would be to contradict this, right? Okay. Because if something is a B and it's not an A, then not every B is an A, right? Okay. So this is one of the two beginnings, principles upon which the syllogism is based, right? Okay. If the set of all is found in the arrangement of the terms, right, then something follows necessarily, right? Okay. And you'll be able to recognize it right away. I mean, if someone has, for example, every B is A and every C is D, it should be clear right away that every what? C is an A, right? It obviously involves this principle here, right? If every B is an A, we told that in the first sentence laid down, right? Then whatever is a B will have to be an A. Since you told all the C's, every C is a B, right? And every one of those C's will have to be an A, right? Okay. Now, if you were told only that some C is B, then you would conclude necessarily only what? The some C is A, right? That's rather kind of obvious, right? Okay. Now, in the first figure, when we study that, you'll find out that if it is a syllogism, the set of all, or its twin principle, we're going to talk about here, the set of none, will be really obvious the way it stands. Huh? Okay. In the second and the third figure, it will not be obvious the way it stands. And therefore, Aristotle calls those syllogisms imperfect in the sense they're not clear. And you have to, even to get them, to see what follows, you have to turn statements around. And that's why we have to study conversion before we can do the second and the third figure. But in the first figure, if it's valid, you'll see the set of all, or the twin principle set of none in it, as it stands. And if either the set of all or set of none applies to it as it stands, you can guess it's not going to be a syllogism. But then we're going to prove there's not a syllogism by examples, right? That will show that when the premises are true, nothing is always so, and therefore nothing is necessarily so. Right? Let's take the set of none, which is the other principle. If A is said of none of B, then A is denied, right, of whatever B is said of. Huh? Okay? So if cat is said of none of the dogs, right? Then cat will be denied of whatever dog is said of, right? If dog is said of all Cocker Spaniels, then it will be denied of all of them. Now, it might be better to state it the other way around because that's the form we're using more. So, if no B is A, then whatever is a B is not an A, right? Okay. If no B is A, then whatever is a B is not an A. Again, is that obvious? Yeah. So, in the first figure, if the set of none applies, you'll see it right away. You have a statement like no B is A, and you will have either every C is B, in which case none of the C's are A's, right? Or you have some C is B, in which case some C is not A. Okay. Now, notice, in all of these forms here, where you have a set of all and a set of none, you have a universal statement, right? And then you have an affirmative statement, right? Placing something under the subject of that universal statement. Now, if you don't have a universal statement, you can't have the set of all or set of none, right? So in all those arrangements in the first figure where the two premises are particular, you would guess right off the bat, right, that they're going to not be syllogisms if the syllogism in fact depends upon the set of all and set of none. Because there's no universality, right? Okay. Likewise, if you have two negative statements, can you have the set of all or set of none? No. Because even the set of none requires an affirmative statement placing something under the subject of the universal negative statement. So right away, you might guess that there are two negative statements or there are two particular statements. It will not be a syllogism, right? But we won't just guess that. We'll use examples to show that it is not so, right? Okay. We'll talk about what you need in the way of examples. Now, what do you need in the way of examples?
You need three terms that will make the premises true.
Well, take an example of the first figure, okay? Okay. Let's take this example here. Every B is A, and no C is B. Okay? Now, can you draw any conclusion with C as a subject and A as a predicate? That's the question we're asking, right? Okay. And I customarily call the predicate conclusion the major term, because the first figure tends to be more universal. And the conclusion, the minor term. Okay. And the term that's found twice but not in the conclusion is called the middle term. Okay. And this is where the middle term is in the first figure. Now, I'll call this first statement here the major premise, because it has the major term in it, and I'll call this the minor premise. Okay. Now, what you want to show is that there's nothing you can say necessarily about C as a subject and as a predicate when these statements are so, right? In other words, you can't say necessarily that every C is A. You can't say necessarily that some C is A. You can't say necessarily that no C is A. And you can't say necessarily that some C is not A, right? So there's nothing affirmative or negative, right? Universal or particular, right? That you can say, right? So you got to find examples that show that none of these is always true when these two are true, right? Okay? So you've got to find examples for A, B, and C that, one, satisfies the condition and you place them in this form, right? The statements are true, right? And one example where this is false, one example where this is false, one example where this is false, and one example where that is false. But now we simplify life, right? Instead of finding 4 sets of examples, right? If I find one example where no C is A is true, right? Then these two would both be what? Yeah. If I find one example where every C is A, these two would be false then, right? Okay. So what I have to do then is find examples for A, B, and C such that, one, when I place them in this arrangement, the statements are true, right? And one of the examples for every C is A, which makes both negatives false ones, right? And one where no C is A is true, which makes both what? Affirmatives false ones. You see that? Okay? So you have to kind of go over that anytime it becomes second nature to you. Okay? So, notice, when I look at this form, every B is A, no C is B, in the first figure, I say to myself, do you have the set of all or the set of none? Well, obviously you don't have the set of all, because you have a negative statement there, right? And the set of all involves it. You don't have the set of none, because the set of none says you have a universal negative statement, and something comes under the subject of that universal negative statement. You've got a universal negative statement here, but nothing is said to be a C. So neither the set of all nor the set of none applies to this. So now I suspect that it's not a what? Syllogism, right? So now I'm going to try to find examples for A, B, and C, such that this will be what? True, these two statements when I substitute my examples in. And I want one example where every C is A and one where no C is A, right? Okay. I think it's something obvious where every B is A. You know, it's kind of second nature, I say. Every dog is an animal. No problem, right? Okay. Take animal for A and dog for B. Every dog is an animal, that's true, right? Okay. Now, I've got to think of a C such that every C is an animal, but no C is a what? Dog. You think of something that is always an animal, but never a dog? Man, yeah. Or a cat, or a horse, right? Take cat, right? Okay. Now, can you think of an example of something that is also never a dog, but never an animal either? Stone. Right? Okay. Now, I tell the students again and again, I say, when you think you found examples that satisfy the two conditions, right? Now, check it out, yeah, right? Okay? So you say, every bee is A, every dog is an animal. Yep, that's true. No C is B, no cat is a dog. Yep, that's true. No stone is a dog. Yep, that's true, right? I have satisfied what? Condition number one, right? With my examples, these premises are both true. When both of these are true, sometimes every C is A, right? Which means that sometimes both negatives are what? Not so, right? And sometimes no C is A, which means both affirmatives are what? False ones, right? So every possible thing, right, is not so always, right? Now, if nothing is so always, then nothing is so what? Necessarily. And if nothing is so necessarily, you don't have any syllogism, right? Notice the way I'm reasoning here. I'm saying, if it's a syllogism, something's necessarily so. If something's necessarily so, it is always so. My examples show that nothing is always so. Therefore, nothing is necessarily so. Therefore, there's no syllogism, right? Okay? So this is what we're going to do in the 16 cases of the first figure, right? We're going to look at all 16 of them, and we'll ask ourselves, does the set of all or the set of none apply to them as they stand, right? If the set of all or set of none apply, it should be obvious right away what follows necessarily. And something does follow necessarily. If the set of all or set of none does not apply to them, then you suspect they're invalid, right? And then, like in this example here, you look for examples for A, B, and C that fulfill these two conditions. And you substitute them in, the statements are true. And in one case, every C is A. In every case, no C is A, right? Now, when I, give exams to students on these things, I'll say to them, I'm going to check the examples to see if they fulfill those two conditions, right? Okay. But in a separate question, I'll ask you, why do those two conditions, right? Why do they suffice to show it's not a syllogism? And then you have to bring other things in, right? You have to point out that the universal affirmative being so excludes the two negatives, right? And the universal negative being so at some time means the two affirmatives are never always so, right? Then you have to see the connection between necessary and always, right? Between necessary and syllogism, right? Okay. So I asked him a separate question to see if they understand why examples fulfilling those conditions are sufficient to show this is not a syllogism. And then you have to go back and say, hey, if it is a syllogism, something would have to be necessarily so. And if something's necessarily so, it would have to be always so, right? And then these conditions that I say these examples have to have show that nothing is always so, right? The fact that the universal affirmative is sometimes so shows that both negatives are not always so, right? And if the universal negative is sometimes true, right? It shows that the two affirmatives are not always so, right? So there's nothing with C as a subject and A as a predicate. So you can say it's always so when these are true, right? There's nothing therefore that is necessarily so when they are so. You see that? Okay. Now let's look at the 16 cases in the first figure. Now the most important ones are the universal cases. So let's put those on the board here. Every B is A. Every C is B. Okay. Now notice this is the arrangement in the first figure. Your middle terms on slant form this way. No B is A. Every C is B. Every B is A, and no C is B. And no B is A, and no C is B. Okay? Now I ask myself in each case, does the set of all or the set of none apply as it stands? And notice, for the set of all or the set of none to apply, you have to have one, a universal statement, and then secondly, an affirmative statement putting something under the subject of the universal statement. Okay. So let's look at this first one. Every B is an A and every C is a B. You have universal affirmative statement, every B is A. And is anything said to come under the B's? Yeah, every C is B, right? So obviously the set of all applies here, right? Okay? Every B is an A, so whatever is a B must be an A. We're told that every C is a B. So necessarily then, every C is A. Huh? So this is by the set of all, right? Recognize the set of all involved in it, right? Okay? Clear? Okay. Now, over here, no B is A, every C is B. Well, now you're going to have to try for the set of none. Do you have a universal negative statement? Yes, no B is A. Does something come under the subject of a universal negative statement? Yeah, we're told that every C comes under the B's. Well, now it follows necessarily that none of the what? None of the C's are A's, right? See that? Instead of none was saying, "Hi, kiddie, you want some logic?" Okay, so if no B is A, right? Whatever comes under the B's cannot be an A, right? You're told that every C comes under the B's, so what follows necessarily is that no C is A, right? And this is by the set of none. Now, every B is A and no C is B is a form that is apt to deceive people, right? Okay. But do you have the set of all or the set of none as it stands? Well, obviously you don't have the set of all because you have a negative statement there, right? But do you have the set of none? Do you have a universal negative statement and something comes under the subject of that universal negative statement? You've got universal negative, no C is B, but does anything come under C? No. So you don't have the set of none, do you? So I suspect that this is not a syllogism, right? But now I'm going to try to show that by examples. Huh? Now, I have to find examples for A, B, and C. And if you want, you could have, two sets of 3 examples, right? But that's unnecessarily, you can usually just, have 2 terms for C and keep the same for A and B, huh? Okay? So if you think of a B and A such that every B is an A, huh? Well, let's say plant, right? Huh? And let's say 3, right? Okay. Every tree is a plant, that's true, right? Okay. Now you've got to find 2 examples for C. And you've got to satisfy 2 conditions here, right? None of them can be trees, right? But one of them has to always be a plant, and the other never a plant, right? So you're taking one by one. Can you think of something that is never a tree, but still always a plant? Bush. Okay. Can you think of something that is never a tree, but never a plant? Dog, stone, syllogism. Okay. Let's say stone, right? Okay. Now, as I tell the students ad nauseam, take your time. Now pause, wisely and slow, as Shakespeare says. They stumble to run fast. Have I satisfied the 2 conditions? Every B is A. Every tree is a plant? Yeah, that's true. No C is B. No bush is a tree? Yeah. No stone is a tree? Yeah. Okay. Have I satisfied the second condition? Do you have one example where every C is A? Yeah. Right here, right? Do you have one example where no C is A? Yeah, right there. Okay. That's enough to show it's not a syllogism, but I might ask the student a separate question. Why is that enough to show, right? What that shows in those examples is that when these statements are true, there's no statement with C as a subject and A as a predicate that is always so. Sometimes affirmative, universal affirmative is so, which means that the 2 negatives are not always so, right? And universal negative is sometimes so, so the 2 affirmatives are not always so, right? So there's nothing affirmative or negative that is always so. And therefore nothing is necessarily so, right? And if nothing is necessarily so, it ain't syllogism, right? Okay? You see that? Now, if you put this in matter where the premises are true, sometimes I'll say to them, let's give you an example here. Every mother is a woman, right? Okay. Now, if you do something like that, let's write it down here. Say, every mother is a woman, and no man is a mother. The students will think it follows that no man is a what? Woman, yeah. Every mother is a woman, right? And no man is a mother, therefore no man is a woman. Does that follow? No. But they're deceived in a sense because all the statements are true, right? It is true that every mother is a woman, and no man is a mother, and no man is a woman, right? And there seems to be some connection between the fact that no man is a woman and no man is a mother, right? But it doesn't really follow, does it? We've shown that this form is what? Syllogism. Huh? But you give a person one with that matter to. Now if I had given him a matter like saying, every dog is an animal, no cat is a what? Dog, they wouldn't think that no cat is a what? Animal, right? But because it's true that no man is a woman, then they're deceived. Huh? The matter seems perfectly good, but it isn't so. Huh? I know as a crafty logician, right? If I want the students to answer incorrectly or show them that they don't really need a little more logic, I'll give them this form with the statements where they're all true, right? It just seems to follow them, right? It's very common. Now, if you have two negatives, we said before that even the set of none requires an affirmative statement, putting something under the subject of the universal negative. So with two negatives, you can get neither the set of all nor the set of none even. Okay? So right away, I suspect this is not a what? Syllogism. And so now I can find examples for A, B, and C. When you think of a B and A such that no B is A,
No plants and animal.
yeah. Okay, so you've got animal here, you've got plant. And no plant is an animal. Now I've got to find two C's. Can you think of a C that is never a plant, but always an animal? The door, right? Yeah, right? Can you find something that is never a plant, but never an animal? Stone, right? Okay. Now we pause. We say, have we satisfied two conditions? What are the two conditions? That when you substitute in your examples for A, B, and C, the premises will be true. And secondly, you have one example where every C is A, excluding the two negatives from always being so, right? And one where no C is A, excluding the two affirmatives from always being so. And therefore together excluding every possibility. There's nothing affirmative or negative, universal or particular you can say about C as a subject and A as predicate. Well, no B is A, no plant is an animal, yeah, that seems to be true. No C is B, no cat is a plant. No, that seems to be true. No stone is a plant, that's true. I have satisfied condition number one. Now condition number two. Professor Berquist has to do this, I tell him, right? Make sure, right? Okay. Can I have one example where every C is A? Yeah. Every cat is an animal. Well, so far on that. Huh? Is there one example where no C is A? Yeah. No stone is animal. I have satisfied the two conditions. That's not a what? Syllogism, right? So the four cases with two universal statements in the first figure, two of them are syllogisms, and two of them are not syllogisms, right? Okay. Sometimes people call this an invalid syllogism, but it's not really a syllogism at all. It's better just to call it not a syllogism. Okay. And we'll see eventually that this case here that concludes every C is A is the only one of all the 48 that you can conclude every C is A. There's going to be more than one to conclude that no C is A, but only one to conclude every C is A. This is very important for demonstration because you prove a property of its subject through the definition of the subject. Huh? So we tend to use this form as Aristotle says in the Osteometics. Okay, do you see that? Okay. Now when you get through all 16, we'll put the ones that were syllogisms back on the board, all together, right? And we'll see some interesting things about them. That'll be the result of that. Now, let's go to the opposite extreme and take the 4 cases where you have 2 particular statements. And as you might suspect, if you have no universal statement, you can have neither the set of all nor the set of none, right? You require true universality, right? For the set of all and the set of none. So let's put down those 4 cases. Now you're in the first figure. In the first figure, your terms are in this arrangement. Okay? So you have some B is A, some C is B. You have some B is A, and some B, excuse me, some C is not B. You have some B is not A. Some C is B, and you have some B is not A, and some C is not B. Now, if you'd like to do a lot of work, we could look for examples for each of the 4, right? Okay. And there are 4 sets of examples. But if you're lazy, then maybe you can find examples for A, B, and C that will satisfy what? All 4 examples, right? Now, how can I do that? Well, I studied a book called The Isagogia of Porphyry, right? Okay? And I've seen the difference between genus and difference and species and property and accident, right? And I know that accidents can what? Be present or be absent, right? And I have something that will belong both to some and not to some, right? Okay? So, let's take, for A, let's take animal. Okay? And for C, let's take something that's always an animal. Let's say dog, right? Okay? And then something that is never an animal, but stone. Huh? Okay? Now, I satisfied one condition there, right? Every dog is an animal, no stone is an animal, right? But now I need a middle term B such that some B is A and some B is not A. And that will work for both of these, right? And where some C is B and some C is not B, and that will work for what? Both of these. Huh? See that? Well, now I go back to Porphyry and say, let's take something accidental, right? Like white, huh? Okay, or white thing, if you want to do that, okay? Well, some white things are animals, some white things are not animals. So this will work whether your major premise is some B is A or some B is not A, right? Okay? And some dogs are white, and some dogs are not white. So that'll work for some C is B and some C is not B, right? And some stones are white, and some stones are not white. See, I saved myself labor, right? Huh? Instead of 4 sets of examples, just 1 set of examples, right? That's all these things are worth, right? Okay? Now, again, I pause and say, have I satisfied both conditions? Well, the major premise is either some B is A or some B is not A, right? And this is true, right? Some white things are animals, some are not. And the minor premise is some C is B or some C is not B. And some dogs are white, some are not. Some stones are white, some are not. I satisfied condition number 1. Okay? Now condition number 2. Do I have an example where every C is A? Yeah. And I'll circle that, right? Every dog is an animal. Do I have an example where no C is A? Yeah. Underline that. No stone is an animal. Okay? So the fact that the universal affirmative is sometimes the case excludes both negatives from always being so. And that the universal negative is true just once. That's all I need. It means that no affirmative statement is always the case. So there's nothing affirmative or negative that is always so. And those statements are true, right? And if nothing is always so, nothing is necessarily so. And if nothing is necessarily so, you ain't got a syllogism, right? You see that? Okay. No big deal, right? Okay. Now we'll go to the 8 forms that are mixed from the universal and the particular statement, right? Okay. And we'll consider those 8. Now we'll begin with the 4 that have the major premise, right? Universal, and the minor premise, what? Particular, right? Okay. So you have every B is A, and the second one is particular. Some B is A, or you have some C is not B. Every B is A, some C is not B. You have the universal negative, no B is A, some C is B, and no B is A, and some C is not B. Okay? Now, which of those 4 do you know right away is not going to have a set of or a set of none? Which one most obvious is not going to have a set of or a set of none?
2 negatives.
Yeah, you can never have the set of all or the set of none with 2 what? Negatives, right? Because even the set of none requires an affirmative statement placing something under the subject of that universal negative statement. And a fortiori, the set of all can never apply to it. Now, in finding examples to disprove this, examples for A, B, and C, remember that even if no C is B is true, it's still true that some C is B, right? Remember what he said? When you say some C is B, you're not saying that some are and some are not. You're just saying some are not, right? So this is true whether the rest are or are not, right? Okay. So, when you think of a B and A such that no B is A, animal, and what? Plant, okay. Now, think of 2 C's. A C that is not a plant, but is always an animal. Yeah. Okay. And now think of something that is never a plant, but never an animal either. Stone. Okay. So it's true that no B is A, no plant is an animal. It's true that some cat is not a plant, right? Okay. Because no cat is a plant. If you took some of them, they would not be. And it's true that some stone is not a plant. I have satisfied condition number 1. Okay. Something else you could know from this too, if you want to just a little deduction here, right? If no B is A is false instead of true, right? What about no A is B? Could that be true?
True. because then you just go backwards.
Yeah, yeah. If the universal negative is true, its converse is always true, right? So if the universal negative is false, its converse will always be what? False, right? Now there's an infinitive statements where no B is A is the form of it, and the statement is false, right? In every one of those, the converse is necessarily what? False. If the converse could be true, then by the conversion we already showed here, the original one would have to be true, right? You know? So isn't it interesting, right? The universal negative statement is true, its converse is always necessarily true. If it's false, its converse is always necessarily what? False, right? We know that for infinity of possibly true universal negative statements and infinity of possible false universal negative statements. Amazing, right? Universality, infinity of the mind, right? You can do that. Incredible. Okay. Now, let's take the universal affirmative. Every B is A. Now, if every B is A is true, if you're given that every B is A, whatever B or A might be, it's true that every B is A. Is it necessarily true that every A is B? No. And one example where it isn't so, right, is enough to show it isn't always so, and therefore that it isn't necessarily so, right? So I take the example, every dog is an animal, right? Every animal is a dog? No. Every woman is a human being, and therefore every human being is a woman? No. So the universal affirmative does not convert necessarily in state universally, right? But if every B is an A, can you say necessarily that at least some A is B? Right? Notice in some cases, both are true. You know, like every 2 is half of 4, and everything half of 4 is a 2, right? Okay. You have a thing in its definition, right? Okay. Every square is an equilateral and right-angled quadrilateral, and every equilateral and right-angled quadrilateral is a square, right? If you have a definition, it should be converted. Why was it not a definition? That's why Socrates will turn around when somebody claims they have a definition, right? If you ask him, what is a dog? He say, well, my definition of the dog is a 4-footed animal. And Socrates would say, well, every dog is a 4-footed animal, but is every 4-footed animal a dog? If you can't turn around, it's not a definition yet, right? So if you have a definition, you should be able to turn around. And if you have a property in the strictest sense, right, that belongs to every member always and necessarily, like half of 4 to 2, then you turn around, right? Okay. But it ain't always so in that form, right? Because B might be something less universal than A, right? Like every dog is an animal. Every square is a quadrilateral, but not every quadrilateral is a square. So just one example is enough to show you can't necessarily infer universally. But can you say that necessarily some A is B? Well, again, so you can't look at all the cases, right? And see that. But you can reason to it, right? I say that when every B is an A, some A must be a B. Now, if you say that that is not true, necessarily, then by the square of opposition, that could be false, right? That some A is B. Then by the square of opposition, what would have to be true? No. Yeah, then no A is B is true. If this were false, right, which I say it can't be, if that were false, even once, then no A is B is true, and then by the what we saw before, no B would be A. So you're saying when every B is A, it's possible that no B is A. Come on now. Is it possible, right? So when every B is an A, no B is an A? Huh? But that follows from you are not admitting that some A is B is necessarily true, right? If that could be false, then no A is B could be true by the square of opposition, right? But could that possibly be true, that no A is B when every B is A? Well, by the first case, then no B is A would be true. Converse of that, right? That's in no way is possible that every B is A, right? The two universal statements cannot both be true. They can both be false, right? They can't both be true. But if some A is B is false, then no A is B must be true. And if no A is B is true, we saw with universal negative, some no B is A must be true. And that obviously can't be true when every B is A. So we say that universal affirmative, right, it converts partially, right? Okay? So it drops from what? Universality to particular, right? That's all you can say necessarily so. Huh? So that's going to be part of the reason why you're going to get only negative conclusions in the second figure, we'll see. Because you convert the universal negative, it remains universal negative. You make that instead of none in some cases, right? But universal affirmative, you convert that, it loses its universality, and therefore you can't have the set of what? Of all, right? You see that? Okay. Now, how about some B is A? If that's true, is it necessarily true that some A is B?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we actually showed that in the first one.
Yeah. If that's not necessarily true that some A is B, if some A is B could be false, even once, right? Then no A is B would be what? True by the square of opposition. And then by the conversion universal negative, no B is A would be true when some B is A, right? Was it possible when some B is A is true that none of the B's are A? No. So something impossible follows, right? So the particular affirmative is converts again, right? Okay.
Isn't that when you showed the universal negative converts? Didn't you use that conversion in that?
No, it was the example, right? You said that, you took an example of something that is both A and B, right? Or give a name to the A that was a B, right? And it's something like that, right? You can probably show it this way if you wanted to, right? I could say, that if some B is an A, some A must be B. But what he shows is usually the universal negative, right? That's very clear from these things.
Okay, but kind of implicitly you showed that because you said we had an X, therefore we had a negative to be.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what's
You
the
could
first
do that,
one.
But Aristotle shows the universal negative first. That's the most important for conversion. And then to that he will show these two, right? Now, what about the particular negative? Suppose it's true that some B is not A. Can you turn around and say that some A is not B? Well, one example is enough to show you can't necessarily say that. Some animal is not a dog. Therefore, some dog is not an animal. Some number is not an odd number. Therefore, some odd number is not a number. Okay. One example suffices to show that it isn't necessarily so. So the particular negative does not convert, right? Now, it seems kind of unsymmetrical, doesn't it, right? Because universal negative is the most useful for conversion. Because you convert and keep universality. Particular negative is useless. You can't convert it at all, So one negative is the best for conversion, and the other one is useless, right? And the two affirmatives are kind of like in between, right? Huh? They will give you no universality when you convert, but you can at least keep the particular, right? See that? Now, in the second and the third figure, the arrangement of terms is never such that you can see the set of all or the set of none as it stands. Right? So what you have to do is to see, can I get the set of all or the set of none by conversion, right? And you have to kind of fiddle around, maybe not too adept at doing this at first, right? And then you might try to find examples. And if you have not seen how you could convert, you won't be able to find examples. But if you do find examples that satisfy the conditions, you know that conversion never reach anywhere. You got to kind of figure around. Aristotle calls these imperfect syllogisms, right? Because they're not clear as they stand, and you have to do some manipulating or converging of them. Now let's look at that in the universal cases here of the second figure. Now, the second figure, your middle term is predicate in both cases. It's in the second spot, as I ironically say, right? So, let's put the four cases with two universal statements. Every A is B, and every C is B. Two universal affirmatives. And then every A is B, and no C is B. The universal negative is a major premise. No B, no A is B, and every C is B, and no A is B, and no C is B. So these are the four cases in the second figure, where the middle term is the predicate in both cases, that have two universal statements, right? Two universal affirmatives, or two universal negatives, or one affirmative and one negative, and two possibilities there, right? Okay. Now, how many of these are syllogisms, have something to follow necessarily, and some not? Which one would you know right away is not a syllogism?
Two negatives.
Yeah. No way to get the set of, even the set of none, let alone the set of all, two negatives, right? So right away I suspect this is invalid, right? So I want to find examples for A, B, and C that satisfy the two conditions. Okay? So can you think of A and C such that every C is an A? Animal.
Animal, dog.
Yeah, no big deal. Okay. And then C that is never an animal. Take stone, let's say, right? Okay. Now I have to find a middle term B that's an animal, a dog, and a stone is never. Okay. Okay. Syllogism. Okay. Angel. Everyone, right? Now, again, I always pause and say, if I satisfy the two conditions, well, what is condition number one? Well, the premises are true when you put in the examples, right? So, no A is B, no animal is a tree, I guess that's right, huh? No C is B, no dog is a tree, I guess that's correct. And no stone is a tree. Huh? I've satisfied condition number one. The premises are true when I substitute in my examples. Huh? Now, if you have one example where every C is A, every dog is an animal, that knocks out the two negatives. It shows they're not always true, right? And if I have one where no C is A, no stone is an animal, That knocks out the two affirmatives as being always the case, right? So there's nothing affirmative or negative that is always so. And therefore there's nothing that is necessarily so. And there's nothing that's necessarily so, there's no syllogism. That's in the very definition of syllogism. Okay? This is not a syllogism, huh? Now, what about no A is B and every C is B, right? Now, notice the set of all and set of none, neither one could apply to it as it stands, right? You can't get the set of all because you have a negative statement there, right? But nothing comes under the subject negative statement. Nothing is said to be an A, right? But can you turn this around and say that no B is A? Yeah, the universal negative turns around. So no B is A. I've shown my little arrow there, my conversion, right? And keep this other one the same. Every C is B. And lo and behold, I imagine, I'm back in the first figure, right? And it seems this is valid in the first figure, right? If no B is an A, and all the C's come under the B's, then no C is A, right? Okay, so go back over here and say, no C is A, right? Okay. So notice what I have to do here. By conversion, I can get the set of none to apply here, right? And I go back to the first figure. So he calls that the first figure, right? Okay. And in a sense, conversion is a way of making clear what is not clear, right? Okay. Now, over here, if every A is B and every C is B, well, now I have to try for the set of all, right? Okay. But the subject of these universal affirmatives, nothing comes under it today. Now, if I could turn around every A is B and say every B is A, then I'd be back in the first figure, right? But we saw that you can't necessarily do that. And the syllogism requires necessity. So I don't think conversion is going to get anywhere. So I suspect that that case, that form, is not a syllogism, right? Okay. But I want to confirm my suspicion by finding examples for A, B, and C. Okay. So the premises are true, and you substitute the examples in. In one case you have what? Universal affirmative, in another case you don't, huh? Well, take something like animal for B. And then for A and C, you want to take one set of examples where both of them are animals and every C is an A. So if you take dog and cocker spaniel, right? Every dog is an animal and every cocker spaniel is an animal. And every cocker spaniel is a dog, right? And I can take something else like cat. Okay. Now, have I satisfied the two conditions? So condition number one is that when the premises are true, when the examples are substituted in, the premises are true, right? Every A is B. Every dog is an animal. That's true. Every C is B. Every cocker spaniel is an animal. Yeah. Every cat is an animal. Yeah. I satisfied condition number one. Now, condition number two. We have one example where every C is A. Yeah, I'll circle that example, right? That knocks out the two negatives as being always so. One where no C is A, yep, I'll underline that. No cat is a dog. That knocks out two affirmatives, right? So there's nothing affirmative or negative that is always so when those statements are true. And if nothing is always so, nothing is necessarily so. If nothing is necessarily so, bring that as syllogism. Okay? I'm kind of getting to see the reason here why we're not going to get the affirmative conclusions, right? You can't convert the universal affirmative as you can the universal negative, right? Now this third case is a little more involved because it's going to have to convert a couple of times, right? We're asking whether there's any conclusion with C as a subject and A as a predicate that is necessarily so. Well, now, since you have universal negative, you're going to have to try it for a set of none, right? And no C is B is universal negative, but nothing comes under C. But you could convert that to what? No B is C, right? And then bring every A is B underneath that, right? Every A is B. And now you have the arrangement of the first figure again, right? Except C and A are reversed. Huh? So no B is to C. You know that by conversion, right? We're given that every A is a B. Well, if all of the A's come under the B's and none of the B's are C's, then no A is what? C. But we were asking, did anything follow with C as a subject and A as a predicate, right? Not reverse. But I can convert, right? So, no C is A. Okay? So this requires what? Two conversions. This other one, that is syllogism, requires what? One conversion, right? Okay. So what I'm saying here is that when no A is B and every C is B, necessarily no C is A. In order to see that that is so, not just looking at it as it stands, you have to see that one can be what? Converted, right? And then you can see that that is necessarily so, right? You're back in the first figure, right? In this other case, you convert and you get back to the first figure too, but your conclusion is the reverse form. But since it's universal negative, you can convert it again and get no C as A, right? Okay. Now these syllogisms are very common. Huh? You find something that is said of one and denied of the other, right? Either way, you're going to do what? Be able to syllogize, right? Okay. But changes is composed, God is not composed, therefore God is unchanging. Very simple. But you have it again and again on the negativo. Theology. Socrates is reasoning that way, right? Huh? And the Phaedo, have you read the Phaedo yet? Okay.
Yeah, we did.
But he's arguing the soul is not the harm of the body, right? And so he syllogizes on the soul resists the body, like the man fasting and so on. But the harming the body doesn't resist the body. Therefore, the soul is not the harm of the body. Okay. He argues so kind that way. There's a harmony of the soul, but there's no harmony of harmony. Therefore, the soul is not the harmony of the body. Or he argues, in the previous argument, that the soul existed before the body. The harmony of the body does not exist before the body, therefore. It's very, very common to use these two. So notice you have two ways of reasoning that no C is A in the second figure here, right? Either by finding something that is said universally with A and denied universally with C, or vice versa, right? The two possibilities. Right? So actually there's more ways to conclude the universal negative we'll see than the universal affirmative. There's only that one way in the first figure to reason to the universal affirmative. There's a way to reason to the universal negative, but there's two ways here in the second figure, right? And those four are the most important, right? Remember, huh? The way to include the universal affirmative and the three ways to reason to universal negative. But we haven't seen that those are the only ways that you might suspect at this point, right? If you have two particular statements, you don't have any syllogism at all, but if you have a particular and universal, you're not going to have a universal conclusion. Now, let's jump to the other end and look at the two particular ones. Huh? Okay. Some A is B, some C is B. some A is B, some A is, some C is not B. Some A is not B. Some C is B. Some A is not B. Some C is not B. Okay. Notice here you're still in the second figure. Your middle term is the predicate in both cases. That's the arrangement of the second figure there, right? The second slot. And these are the four ones that have what? Particular premises, right? Particular statements. Now you know that by conversion you're never going to get any universality, right? There's no universality. Your conversion will never give you any universality. You can't convert the particular negative at all. In particular affirmative, you can only convert to some. So you know conversion is not going to give you a syllogism. So I suspect that all four of them are not syllogisms. Now if I can be clever like I was before, maybe you can find one set of examples to eliminate all of them, right? Huh? Okay. So we could take animal, let's say, for A, and dog for C, and what? Stone for what? C, right? And I satisfied one condition. Every dog is an animal, and no stone's an animal. Now I have to find a B such that some animals are and some are not B. And some dogs are B, and some dogs are not, and some stones are, and some are not. Now I go back to my dear friend Porphyry, right? And maybe he's not my dear friend, because he was not about Christian. But anyway, my teacher, Porphyry. And I say, okay, some animals are white, and some animals are not white. I take a predicable axiom, right? Or it can be present or absent. That's the definition of the predicable axiom, right? So, animal may or may not be white. So some animals are white, some are not. Some dogs are white, some are not. Some stones are white, some are not, right? So it works for any possibility here, right? Okay. And I satisfied the conditions here, right? Every dog is an animal, and no stone is an animal. Okay, so don't waste examples like one set of examples. Now, let's start to go and look at the mixed forms. And the mixed forms are the ones where one premise is universal and the other is what? Particular, right? And so take the four in which the major premise is universal and the minor is particular, and then the reverse four, right? Okay. So you've got every A is B, or no A is B, huh? As your major premise. The second one now, in the mixed case, is particular, right? There's two possibilities. Either particular affirmative, some C is B, or some C is not B. Same over here with no A is B. Some C is B, and some C is not B. Okay, those are the four mixed cases in which the universal premise is the major premise, right? And the minor premise is particular, right? Okay. Now, which one are you sure right away is not going to be a syllogism? Double negative, yeah. So you write down not a syllogism, but you want to show it now by examples for A, B, and C that satisfy the two conditions, right? Well, maybe you could take an example where no C is B, right? If you wanted to, right? So you can take, say, for A, animal, for C, dog, and then let's take what? Stone, right? Okay. Now we've got to find a B such that no animal is a B, and some dog and some stone is not it. We've got to work even if no dog and no stone is it, right? What could that be? Tree?
Tree.
Okay. Now it's good to always pause and say, have I satisfied the two conditions? And what are the conditions? Are the premises true with those examples? No A is B, no animal is a tree. And sometimes what I would do, in class, or I'm a student, I might, write these in like this, so it's easy to follow, right? No animal is a tree. And what? Some dog is not a tree, and some stone is not a tree, right? That doesn't mean that some are and some are not. It doesn't mean some are. And I have one example for every C is A, which means the two negatives are not always the case. And one example where no C is A, no stone is an animal, which means the two affirmative possibilities are not always the case. So nothing is always so. Therefore, nothing is necessarily so. Therefore, you don't have a syllogism, right? Now, no A is B, we've got universal negative, and you know the strength of that, right? That's what they're most likely you'd be able to get something from. Now, if you convert, as it stands, you don't have anything coming under the subject of universal negative. But you can convert no A is B to what? No B is A. Keep some C as B, and lo and behold, by magic, you're back in the first what? Figure, yeah. And that's obviously hell, right? But notice it's a negative conclusion again, right? All you've had so far in the second figure is negative conclusions. Huh? Some C is not B. Give myself my finger. Okay? Some C is not B, right? Excuse me. Not A yet. Okay? See that? Erased it and make it more clear. Okay. So, notice, you have to convert, in this case you convert the major premise no A is B to no B is A, right? And then you have something coming under the subject of the universal negative, namely some C, right? So if the some C's are B's and none of the B's are A's, then that some C cannot be A. Okay. Now, what about every A is B and some C is B? Now, if you could convert the universal affirmative, you could go back to the first figure, right? And say every B is A, and that some C being a B would have to be an A, right? But you can't necessarily convert the universal affirmative, right? If you convert the universal affirmative, it becomes particular. So I suspect this is not a syllogism, right? So I'm going to put down my suspicion, not a syllogism. The professor requires examples, so I'll have to satisfy him, okay? Now, when you think of A, B, and C, examples that satisfy those conditions, that satisfy the conditions.
Dog for A.
Okay. Animal would be. Now, what could I have for C?
A Cocker Spaniel.
Okay. Since every Cocker Spaniel is an animal, it's also true that some Cocker Spaniel is an animal, right? And then you could have a cat or something, right? Of course, getting tired of cats now. I'll get as much as you can on the same examples. Huh? So now I stop and I say, have I satisfied the two conditions? Well, what's the conditions? Are the premises true with those examples? Every A is B. Every dog is an animal. That seems to be true. Some C is B. Is some Cocker Spaniel an animal? Yeah. Is some cat an animal? Yeah. So I satisfied condition number one. Premises are true when I substitute those examples. Now condition number two. Do I have one example for a universal affirmative where every C is A? Yeah, I'll circle that. Every Parker Spaniel is a dog. That knocks out the two negatives, right? As being always so. Do I have one universal affirmative where no C is A? Yep. Underline that cat, right? The cat is a dog. And that knocks out the two affirmatives as being always the case. So there's nothing affirmative or negative that is always the case. And nothing is always so, nothing is necessarily so. Nothing is necessarily so. You ain't got it, you haven't got it. A syllogism, right? That's the very definition of syllogism. You see? Okay. Now, what about this fourth case here? Well, here you can see that you can't get the set of all or the set of none. Obviously, you can't get the set of none, set of all because you have a negative statement, right? But you can't get the set of none either because what? You can't convert the particular negative at all, right? You don't have any universal negative statement to begin with, right? Okay. So, according to the rules I've given you up to this point, right, which are sufficient for the most part, you might guess that this is not a what? Syllogism, right? But do you think you could find examples to satisfy the two conditions in this case? No. So, on the one hand, you don't have the set of all or the set of none, even by conversion. On the other hand, you can't find examples to satisfy the conditions. Try as you will. Now, maybe if you just kind of think about it and say, well, look, if every A is a B, every one of the A's is a B, but some C is not a B, could that some C be an A? Every A is a B, right? You kind of figure out that some C is not an A, right? But how can I, show this by the set of all or the set of none, right? How can I show by the set of all and some set of none, or one of them at least, that some C is not A? I can see it on my own little way, right? Well, I could take the contradictory of some C is not A, which is what?
Every C.
Every C is A, right? Okay. And if every C is A were true, then since every A is B, then every C would be B, which contradicts this, right? You see what I'm doing? Okay. I'm taking the contradictory of the what I say is necessarily so. I'm taking the contradictory of that and joining that to one of the premises, and I contradict the other premise. So in other words, you take the contradictory of this, which is every C is A. Every C is A and every A is B contradict by the first figure, some C is not B, right? Okay? So, these three statements, you could say, are what? Cannot be held together, right? They're incompatible, right? So, if every A is B is laid down, and some C is not B is laid down, you must reject every C is A. It cannot be so with those two. And therefore you must what?
Accept that.
Yeah, because that's the contradictory, right? And contradictory statements are posed such that both cannot be true, both cannot be false. One must be true and the other false, regardless of whether you know which is the true or the false one, right? Okay. You see how you do that? Okay. That's very interesting, right? And that's kind of the exception to the rules I gave you, right? See. For the most part, let's say in the second and third figure, if something is a syllogism, you can get it clearly by converting, right? One premise. In this case, you can't convert and get syllogism, right? But if you went on to think, therefore, it's probably not a syllogism, and you try to find examples, you'll never find examples that satisfy the conditions, right? And I know when I correct, students examine logic, and they, are trying to disprove and show that some form that is a syllogism is not a syllogism, right? Their examples are never satisfying the condition. They never do. If they satisfy the condition, they would have made history, at least. But the point is that since it is a syllogism, they must have made a mistake in their example. And they didn't, as I told them to do, maybe Professor Berquist had to do it, he has to, check over his calculation, right? Just like Einstein, made some false calculations, and some nobody corrected him, Einstein, finally back and realized he had it's calculated, right? Heisenberg tells the time he got a great idea, right? He was very excited. He came back to the institute there and he started, calculating and making all kinds of stupid mistakes, and finally he calmed down and started calculating slowly. Everything came out just perfect, And he's on the way to his Nobel Prize, right? So, I tell the students, always go back and check your examples, right? Because if you have made the mistake of thinking something is not a syllogism, it is, right? And therefore look for examples, you will not have found examples that satisfy the two conditions. If you had done the simple check and took your time and some kind of, damn it, if I satisfy condition number one, yes, so it's like, but you have to do that, right? And then you will see which examples don't, and you might rethink it, right? So this is a very interesting thing here, right? It does follow necessarily that some C is not A, right? But the set of R or set of none is not in it as it stands, right? And you can't get the set of R or set of none by conversion, right? But if you take the contradictory of what follows necessarily, you can syllogize, right? To the contradiction of the other premise, the one premise to the contradiction of the other premise.
So that must be true then of all the other valid syllogisms, that you could do that.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. This one here is,
just a proof of that.
It's more difficult, right?
Yeah.
And notice the way we did that, in a way with the case of the if-then syllogism that's not so clear, right? We said if A is so, B is so, A is so, B is so, that's kind of obvious, right? But if B is not so, then A is not so, right? And we said, well, if A were so, then by the first case, the obvious case, B would have been so, right? But you've given that B is what? Not so, right? So the statement, if A is so, then B is so, B is not so, and A is so, are not compatible. A is so with the if-then statement would necessarily include to B being so, which contradicts the other premise, right? We're doing something similar here, right? Okay. I'm taking the contradictory of what I say is necessarily so, and showing that that is incompatible with the two premises, because with one of them, by the set of all, syllogizes to the contradictory of the other, right? So in a sense, you show it to the first figure. But not as easy as you do when you convert, right? You show it by taking the contradictory of the conclusion and adding that to one premise and contradicting another premise. And therefore you see that the contradictory of the conclusion is not compatible with those two premises, because added to one of them, it contradicts the other. If every C is A and every A is a B, then every C is a B. And that contradicts some C is not B. So you can't take the contradictory of the conclusion with those two premises. So you must reject every C as A and hold on to these two. And therefore you must. Premises are true. Neither an affirmative statement nor a negative statement is always the case, right? Because sometimes universal affirmative is so, which means the two negatives are not always so. And sometimes the universal negative is so. So the two affirmatives are not always so. Therefore, nothing is always so. Nothing affirmative, nothing negative. If nothing is always so, then nothing is necessarily so, right? Put that in the form of an if-then syllogism, right? If something is necessarily so, it's always so. But nothing is always so, therefore nothing is necessarily so. And another if-then syllogism. If it's a syllogism, something is necessarily so, but nothing is necessarily so. So you haven't got a syllogism. I think that's syllogism, right? Okay? So right away. Now, does the set of all apply, or the set of none, to these first two here? Every B is A, you've got a universal affirmative. Does anything come under the subject of the universal affirmative? Yeah. But you're told only that some C comes under B. So all you can conclude necessarily is what? Some C is A, right? So this is a syllogism by the set of all. Set of all means you have what? A universal affirmative statement, and something comes under the subject of the universal affirmative statement. Okay? And therefore, going to be predicate of that universal statement. Now when you say no B is A, some C is B, you have the set of none then? You have a universal negative statement, no B is A, that's the first thing required in a set of none. And something has to come under the subject. Something has to be said to be a B. Does something come under B? Yeah. But in this case, only some C, right? So you can conclude with necessity that some C is not what? Yeah. Now, how about this over here? Does the set of all apply to that? You've got a universal affirmative statement, that's part of what's required. But does anything come under the subject of that universal affirmative? Is anything said to be a B? No. You said some C is not B, right? So you suspect that you can't say anything necessarily with C as a subject and A as a predicate. So you look for examples then for A, B, and C to show that nothing is always so. And they have to give you true statements when you substitute them in. And there has to be one example where every C is in fact A, and another one where in fact no C is A, right? So can you think of an A and a B such that every B is an A?
Animal, dog.
Yeah. Okay. So every dog's an animal, that's true. Now I've got to find the C such that some C is not a dog, and it can be even the no C is a dog, right? We get every C as a none. You take what? Cat. Yeah. And then something that is not a dog, that's not an animal either. Stone, right? Oh, gee. So two birds with one stone, right? Yeah. Pun there. So, in the mixed forms, right, where the major premise is the universal one, right, and the minor is particular, there's two cases that are syllogisms and two that are not, right? Okay? Just like there were two among the universal ones, right? But none among the two particular ones, right? Now we've got to look at the four remaining cases where the particular is on top as a major premise and universal below, right? So the particular is universal premise, so it's in the form either some B is A or some B is not A, right? And then your minor premise is either universal affirmative or universal negative, right? So every C is B, every C is B. Or you have universal negative below. Some B is A, no C is B. some B is A, and no C, excuse me, some B is not A, and no C is B, okay? Those are the four possibilities, right? The major premise is particular. It's either what? Particular affirmative or particular negative, right? And the second one is universal. There's two possibilities. Every C is B and no C is B. Universal affirmative, universal negative, right? Now right away, you know if there's two negatives down here, that's going to be not a syllogism, right? There's no way you can get the set of none even with two negatives. So I look for examples for A, B, and C, such that the premises are true when I put them in, and yet in one case every C is A, and in every other case no C is A, right? Okay. Now again, it's probably easier to take an example where no B is C, right? No B is A rather than just some B is not A, right? But can you think of an example where some B is not A?
Or just some?
Either way. They say the universal negative is true, the particular negative will be true as well. Right, okay. We're just some, right? You could say some animals are not what? Dogs, right? Okay. Now, that works for that thing. But now, can I find examples for a C that are going to satisfy two conditions? Can I find something that is never an animal, but always a dog? No. So then I say the examples aren't going to work, right? I've got to give another kind of examples, right? Okay. So. What would you take? Stop and think of it.
Animal and stone.
Okay. Since no stone is an animal, it's also true that some stone is not an animal. Okay? You tell the students, you say what? Some students have failed the course. Doesn't mean some have passed either. Or if I say some have passed, it doesn't mean that some have not passed, right? Don't give me a you passed the exam. I say, some of you passed. That sounds ominous, right? But if I've only corrected some and they have passed and corrected, right? All I can say for sure is that some have passed, right? So don't read into my book what I'm saying, right? So if no stone is an animal, some stones are not, or some stone is not an animal, right? And then can you find a C such that no C is a stone, but it's always an animal? Cat, dog, makes no difference, yeah. And then something else that is never a stone but never an animal?
Plant.
Plant, yeah. Okay. So this is not a syllogism, right? Okay. Now, in these other cases, you do have a universal statement, don't you, right? Like in the first one up here, some B is A and every C is B. You have a universal statement, every C is B, but does anything come under the subject of that universal statement? No. You don't really have the set of all, do you? So I suspect that it's invalid, right? Huh? Okay. So I look for examples for A, B, and C, and let's see if those other ones work this time, right? If I take dog up here, right? An animal, some animal is a dog, right? That's true. And then I take a C such that every C is an animal and every C is a dog. Well, let's take a Cocker Spaniel or something, right? Some kind of dog, right? So every Cocker Spaniel is an animal and every Cocker Spaniel is a what? Dog. And then let's take the cat and the horse, and every cat is an animal, but no cat is a dog, right? Are you satisfied now with the three conditions? Are the premises true when I use those terms? Okay. Some B is A. Some animal is a dog? True. Every C is B. Every Cocker Spaniel is an animal? Yep. Every cat is an animal? Yep. I satisfy condition number one. The examples are, when they're substituted in, the premises are true, right? And second now, do I have one example where every C is A? Yep, I'll circle that one. Every Cocker Spaniel is a dog, right? I have one example where no C is A. Yep, I'll underline that to make sure I have both conditions, right? Now I've shown that there's nothing affirmative or negative that's always so when those premises are true, right? There's no affirmative statement that is always so, because sometimes no C is A, like no cat is a dog, right? There's no negative statement that is always true, because sometimes every C is A. Right? Okay. Now, some B, let's go down some number. Some B is A, no C is B, right? You can't try for the set of all, because you have a negative statement there. But you have the set of none. Well, the set of none requires a universal negative statement and something coming under the subject of the universal negative. Well, no C is B is universal negative, but is anything said to be at C? No. So I suspect that this is not a what? Syllogism, right? I got to find examples for A, B, and C to satisfy the two conditions. Huh? Yeah, it might be easy to go back and take that B that is always an A, right?
Animal dog.
Yeah. So every dog is an animal. Some dog is an animal too, right? Be careful with the students. If every student passed, but some students did not pass. Every student passed. It's true, but some students passed too, right? Every student did pass, but some students, you, didn't pass. So, yeah, not good thinking there. Okay. And I have to find two C's, such that no C is a dog, one of them, but every C is an animal. Think of something like that? Cat, yeah. And then a C that's never a dog, but never an animal either. Stone, yeah. Now, I always pause, you see, and I say, have I satisfied both conditions? Well, condition number one is, are the premises true of those examples? Some dog is an animal? Yeah. And no cat is a dog? Yep. And no stone is a dog? Yep. I satisfied condition number one. I satisfied condition number two. You have one example where every C is A? Yeah, I'll circle that. Every cat is an animal? That's true. You have one example where no C is A? Yep. No, underline that. No stone is an animal, right? So I satisfied all the conditions, so I've shown it not to be a syllogism, right? That's a separate thought to say, why do those conditions, why does satisfying those two conditions suffice to show it's not a syllogism, right? Well, if you stop and think about it, those examples satisfying those conditions show that when the premises are true, right? There's nothing affirmative that is always so, and there's nothing negative that is always so. Because universal affirmative being true once shows that the two negatives are not always the case. And the universal negative being true once shows that two affirmatives are not always the case, right? So there's nothing affirmative or negative that is always so when the premises are true. And if nothing is always so, nothing is necessarily so. And if nothing's necessarily so, you haven't got a syllogism, right? Okay? See that? If you want to be more precise, you say, if there's a syllogism, then something follows necessarily. If something follows necessarily, it's always so. If nothing is always so, if there's nothing necessarily so, therefore it's not a syllogism. Okay? So rather than repeat that, I'll ask the students, a separate question, right? I'll give them examples like this, and they have to find examples, and I'll check and see if the examples satisfy the conditions, right? But then I'll ask them elsewhere, why do those two conditions suffice to show it in the syllogism? Then you have to bring out the fact that the syllogism means necessarily so, or necessarily so requires something to be always so, right? And the examples show that nothing is always so, right? But you have to go back and wait to the square of opposition. You're seeing that if the universal affirmative is true, any negative statement is not always true, right? And if the universal negative is true once, no affirmative is always true, right? Okay. So you exhaust the possibility, right? Nothing affirmative for the universal particular is always the case. Nothing negative, right? It's always the case. Okay. But rather than find one example for each four where it's false, I find two where universal affirmative and universal negative. So I can kill two birds with one stone.
Suppose you kept the same word of the particular affirmative with the one we just did, and the universal negative, yet instead of some B is A, you had some A is C, no C is B. Would you then have a valid set of none?
Or if you could turn around, no C is B, and say no B is C, right? Okay. Then you turn this around, you could say that some A is not C, but you can't turn around a particular negative. So there's no conclusion with C as a subject and A as the predicate, right? When you get to the second and third figure, you'll see that the set of all and the set of none never apply to it as it stands. You have to convert statements, right? And so there's an extra step there in the second and third figure. But after you fiddle around converting, if you don't seem to be able to turn it into it, then you suspect it's not a syllogism, and then you look for the examples, right? Okay. And maybe one case is a little tricky because that's a little roundabout. We can show it. We'll see that, right? I mean, for the most part, that's all you have to do, right? In the first figure, does a set of all or a set of none apply to as it stands? If it does, it should be clear right away what follows. If it doesn't apply to as it stands, then it's going to not be a syllogism, but you can always find examples to show this not a syllogism. Okay? In the second and third figure, the set of all and set of none will never apply to it as it stands. But sometimes it can be made to apply by conversion. But if it doesn't apply by conversion, then you suspect it's invalid, and you find examples, right? Okay. Now, I've done this for years, but I used to say to students, for those four forms that we showed were syllogisms, right? You can never find examples for those forms that would satisfy the two conditions. Because they stay up all night trying to find examples. And, I used to be very flamboyant. I up my billfold, and I wave, bills, and say, to the first man who can do this, right? And I put a lien in my salary, so she'll collect my salary for the rest of my life, see? And so I said, if you're down in South Africa, 40 years from now, you think of examples, telegram me, and I'll send you the money, right? And, I used to say, this is a crude age. They don't believe in truth, but they believe in money. So, I'm not sure about these things. And they stay up all night, so they could ever get it. It's possible, isn't it? But we got one more case to look at. Some B is not A, or C is B. Well, obviously you can't get either the set of all or the set of none, can you? You have a universal affirmative, but the other statement is negative. So you can't have the set of all, which requires two affirmatives. And obviously you're going to be universal negative, so you would suspect then that this is not a syllogism, right? So you find examples for A, B, and C that satisfy the two conditions. So, can you think of a B and A such that some B is not A?
Plant,
Plant animal, okay. Since no plant is an animal, some plant is not an animal, right? And every C is B. Can you think of a C such that every C is a plant and every C is a what?
There's a micro, what is that microorganism? Has both chlorophyll, what is that?
That gonna work? I think you gotta stop and think of examples. Huh?
You have to double the A.
Maybe that's one way of doing it, right? Yeah.
Couple of them.
But yeah, something that, oh, I see what you mean, yeah. Oh, that's one way of doing it, yeah.
What's the double way?
Instead of taking two C's,
Oh, so which example for A?
animate and inanimate.
Huh?
Animate and inanimate.
Animate and inanimate?
Yeah.
Okay. Inanimate. And this is plant,
No, that's white.
white. And this is what?
Snow.
Snow.
Yeah.
So, let's check now. Some B is not A. Some white things are not what? Animate and some are not inanimate. Then, so that's okay. Every C is B. All snow is white. Okay. And snow, animate, universal what? Negative, right? Snow and animate, universal affirmative, right? Okay. Can you do it also finding two examples for C, huh? So we're doing that. Or you might take our friend there, animal and dog, right? Some animal is not a dog, right? That's true, right? And every Cocker Spaniel is an animal, right? And every cat is an animal. I satisfy condition number one, right? The premises are true. Some animal is not a dog, and every Cocker Spaniel is an animal, and every cat is an animal. That's condition number one. Do we have an example where every C is A? Yep. I'll circle that. Every Cocker Spaniel is a dog. Do we have an example where no C is A? Yep. Underline that. No cat is a what? Dog, right? So none of these ones are syllogisms, right? Okay. So notice that, huh? In the four cases with two universal statements, there were two syllogisms, right? Mm-hmm. And in the four where you had two particulars, there's no syllogism, right? In the 8 where you have a mixed one, well, in the 4 where you have the major premise being particular, you have no syllogism. But in the 4 where you have the major premise being a universal, you have 2, right? There are 2 that are not a syllogism, right? So out of the 16 cases then, we have 4 that have the form of a syllogism, right? And 12 that do not have the form of a syllogism, right? Okay? Now, let's put the 4 forms that are syllogisms. 4 forms in the first picture. You have every B is A, and every C is B, and you had no B is A, and every C is B, and then in the mixed forms you had every B is A, and some C is B, and no B is A, and some C is B. Okay? Now, if you look at these 4, you'll notice that all 4 possible statements with C as a subject and as a predicate are found here, right? From every B as an A, and every C coming under the B's, every C must be an A, right? From no B as an A, but all the C's coming under the B's, none of those C's can be an A. So no C is A. Now the other two are like that, except you're told only that some C comes under the B's, right? So if every B is an A, you know some C is a B, you know that some C at least is an A, right? In the last case, you're told that some C is a B, but none of the B's are A's, so that you know at least that some C is not a what? An A, yeah. So in the first figure, you can draw all four possible conclusions. Huh? Universal affirmative, particular affirmative, universal negative, and particular negative, right? And none of the other figures will seek to draw these four conclusions. In the second figure, you'll find out that all you can draw is a negative conclusion, no affirmative. Just there's two here, no C is A and some C is not A, we'll find out in the second figure. In the third figure, you can't draw any universal statements. Just particular, some C is A and some C is not A, right? So there's a falling off of power in the second and the third figure. A syllogism that has a universal conclusion is more powerful than one that can only conclude to a particular, right? So in the third figure, you have no universality in your conclusion at all. So that's the reason why he calls it the third figure. One reason why he calls it the third figure. It's the weakest, right? In the second figure, you do have universality, but only universal what? Negative. Huh? But in the first figure, you have both universal negative and universal affirmative as well as the particulars. Huh? So in terms of power, the first figure we'll find out is more powerful than the second, and the second is more powerful than the third, right? And that's why it's more important to remember the first and second figure and the powerful cases, right? Because those are the ones that are used over and over again in reasoned out knowledge, in geometry, in natural philosophy, in theology, and so on, right? Okay. Now, what about the premises when you have a syllogism in the first figure? Let's make an induction here now, right? Okay. What can you say about the major premise? Huh? The premise that contains the predicate and the conclusion. It's always what? In the first figure. So it's universal. And the minor premise is always what? Affirmative, yeah. Okay. Now, write that down. The major premise is always universal, as a syllogism, and the minor premise is always affirmative. Now, is there any other case that we considered, any of the other 12, that have those same two conditions?
No.
No. Because if the major premise is universal, there's only two possibilities, universal affirmative or universal negative, right? And for each of those two possibilities, if the minor premise is always affirmative, there's only two possibilities, right? Either universal affirmative or particular affirmative, right? So 2 times 2 is 4, right? It's only 4 cases, right? The other 12 are not what? Syllogisms, right? Okay. Although I know and you know now the one that would deceive the students, right? So Elijah teaches you that something. But the two most important ones are these two universal ones. Right? Now, not only is there a falling off of power in the second and even more so in the third figure, but the cases that are syllogisms in the second and third figure, it's not clear right away that the set of all or set of none are involved, right? What you have to do is what? Turn them around, right? Put the subject where the predicate is, or vice versa. And so now we have to study the topic of conversion, right? Okay. Because conversion is a way of making an imperfect syllogism in the second or third figure clear, right? And when you convert, you get back in something resembling the first figure. Okay? Now, let me just exemplify, before I go into conversion here, this thing here. Take the second figure here. Suppose you had, on the second figure, this is the arrangement of terms. The middle term B is the predicate in both cases, right? In the third figure, it would be reverse. The middle term will be the subject in both cases, huh? Okay. When I was first learning this back in high school, my mnemonic device was that in the second figure, the middle term is in the second spot. There's no third spot. Once I do that, then the third versus the reverse, right? Okay. That's how I remember the first figure. That's why I kept the second and third figures. That's my mnemonic device. Okay. But Aristotle calls it the second one because it's less powerful than the first, but more powerful than the third, right? Now notice in the second figure, if you had a form like this, no A is B, and every C is B, right? Okay. Now, does the set of all or the set of none apply to it as it now stands? No. You've got a universal negative statement, no A is B, but nothing is coming under A. You have a universal affirmative, every C is B, but nothing comes under what? C. But now, if I could turn this around, if I could turn this around and say that no B is A, and keep the other one like it is, every C is B, I'd be back in the first figure, right? And I could syllogize that no C is A, right? But now I've got to consider, if it's true that no A is B, is it necessarily true the reverse that no B is A, right? Okay. That's what we have to consider, right? Okay. And we're going to find out that in fact it is, but the question is, how can we know this for sure? Because there's an infinity, right, of possible statements in the form no A is B that is true. Right? And I can't go through all those examples to see that it's always so, right? So how can Aristotle show, for an infinity, right, of possible statements that are true in the form no A is B, that regardless of what A and B are, so long as it's true that no A is B, it will also be true that no B is A. Reverse. Okay. Now, what about this now? See, every A is B, and every C is B. Huh? Now, if I could turn around the statement every A is B, okay, if I could turn it around and say that every B is A, necessarily, keep the other one like it is, I'd be back in the first figure and I could syllogize the universal affirmative statement, right? But is it necessarily true that if every A is B, the reverse is true? No. Just one example is enough to show that it ain't necessarily so, right? So every dog is an animal, but not every animal is a dog, right? Every odd number is a number, but not every number is an odd number, right? So you can't convert the universal affirmative and keep it universal, right? Of necessity. But the universal negative you can, we'll see. But, you know, again, my monetary challenge, right? I challenge anybody to find a what? Statement in the form no A is B that is true, and reverse no B is A is not true. How can I be sure about that? See? Okay. Well, let's see how Aristotle does this. Huh? We're going to look at the four corners there of the square of opposition. We're going to see to what extent they do or do not convert, right? Okay. So let's take the statement. The letter is not important, but just take B and A. if no B is A is true, I say, okay, that the reverse will be true, right? Okay, no A is B. Now, I'm just asserting that. I haven't given you any proof, have I, right? Okay. Now, if you don't admit that no A is B is necessarily true, right? Then, by the square of opposition, the universal negative could be false, right? Then what could be true?
Some A is B.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So if this is false, what I'm saying now, you see, if it's true, given it's true that no B is A, no matter what B is, no matter what A is, right? I maintain that it's true that no B is A, it will be true the reverse, that no A is B. I say it can never be false. But if you don't accept that, you've got to say that sometime, somewhere, no B is A is true, but no A is B is what? False, right? Okay. Now, if no A is B is false once, even, right? At that one time, then by the square of opposition, some A is what? B, right? See how the logic of the second act is presupposed the logic of the third act, right? Okay? So then some A is B is what? Could be true, right? Okay. Now, if some A is B could be true, let it be true. You said it could be true, right? Okay. And now Aristotle says, let's give a name to the A that is a B. There's just one A that is a B, right? You're going to get trouble, I'll say. Let's give a name to the A that is B. Okay? I'm not sure what you want to call it. Let us call the A that is a B, let's call it X, right? Okay? Now, if you call the A that is a B X, then X is both an A and a B, isn't it? Okay? Follow that? Then X is both an A and a B. Now, if X is both an A and a B, then there is a B, namely X, right, that is an A. Then there is a B, namely X, that is an A. So that follows from your saying that no A is B is not necessarily true. I say it is necessarily true. If you say it is necessarily true, then you're saying it could be that some A is B by the square of opposition. If that could be, let it happen, right? And let's call the A that is a B X, right? Then X must be both an A and a B. Therefore, there is some B, namely X, that is an A. So you're saying that when it's true that no B is A, possibly some B is an A, right? It's contradiction, right? So something impossible follows, right? Notice I'm arguing in a sense by that argument, right? I'm saying that if no B is A is true, then the reverse, no A is B will be true, right? If you say that's not true, then some A is B could be true, right? And if that was true, there'd be an A that is a B, and we call it X, right? And then X would be both a B and an A, and therefore there'd be a B named the X that is an A, right? So something impossible follows, right? When no B is A is true, it's impossible that some B is an A, right? But that would follow from your admission, right? So you're going to be forced to say that if no B is A, no A is B, right? Now, I think this is something a monkey can't do. It's kind of amazing to see this, right? That Aristotle has shown here for an infinity of possibly what? Universal negative statements is infinity of them that are true, right? No 3 is a 4, no 3 is a 5, no 3 is a 6. Go on forever, right? There's an infinity of universal negative statements that are true, right? There are infinity of statements in the form no B is A that are true, right? And for every one of them, reversed, no A is B is true. You can't possibly go through them all one by one, right? You can't look at them all, right? But this reasoning here shows that if you don't say that, something impossible follows, right? That some B would be A, which the square opposition is impossible with no B is A. You see that? That's kind of marvelous when you stop and think about that, right? So you consider kind of abstracting and say, now, see, no dog is a cat, no cat is a dog. Okay, they're both true in that case, right? No stone is a tree, no tree is a stone. It's true in that case, you know. No man is a woman, no woman is a man, But it's going to be always true. You can't, begin to go through all of it, right? You never go through all of them. But here he's shown that no matter what you take for DNA, right? If the universal negative is true, the converse will be like true, right? And this is the reason why we'll see later on in the second figure that you get a negative conclusion, because of the fact you can convert the universal negative and it stays universal, right? Okay. You see that? Do you want to go over it again, or leave it? Yeah.
Are there examples that can be plugged in?
No. You can never find. As I always explain to students, you can never show that something is a syllogism by examples, right? Examples never show that something is necessarily so. They don't even show that it's always so, right? But one example is enough to show that something is not always so, right? See? If I say that man is necessarily white, no matter how many white men I produce, I haven't shown that man is always white, although necessarily white. But you produce one black man or one yellow man, and goodbye to my claim that it's necessarily true, right? Okay. If I say every number is necessarily odd, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 1, you get infinity examples. I haven't shown that it's always so, right? You produce one number that is not odd, poof, there goes my claim, right? So examples can be used to show that something is not a syllogism, but never to show that it is. Okay? That's always a question I ask the students, Why are examples enough, right? Well, one example is enough to show that something is not always so. But one example, or even 100 or 1,000,000 or infinity of them, is not enough to show that something is always and necessarily so. Okay? Well, the same way here. I'm saying, this is not a syllogism, but I'm saying that when no B is A is true, necessarily no A is B is true, right? Okay? I can't show that that is so by examples, right? No. But at the same time, if I show it in the way that I showed it, you could not find one example. I lay my money on the table, unfortunately today, but, pull out my wadded dollars and so on, and send over my insurance policy or like that. Social Security to send my check to you, and so you cannot find one example of DNA, right, where no B is A is true and no A is B is not true. I know you can't find one, right? Because I know that necessarily no A is B is true. How do I know that? Well, if that's not true, then some A is B could be so, right? And if that happened, then some A would be a B, and we could give that A is a B, call it something, an X, right? And therefore X would be both an A and a B, and therefore there'd be some B, namely X, that is an A, and that's impossible when no B is A, right? So something impossible follows if you don't admit necessarily that the converse, universally speaking, is also true, right? Two cases that are syllogisms and two that are not, right? But the two that are syllogisms are, of course, particular as you expect, right? that they're both particular what? Negative, right? On those same four in the first figure, you had one particular affirmative and one particular what? Negative, right? I'll let you want to go now.
We could finish this figure. You have one more set of four?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay. When I was first learning this, my thinking was, I want to think about this in a quiet room away from everybody else. I'll figure it out, but I don't want anything else around. So you may feel that way by now. See, there's nothing to get away from all this company and talking. I'm firmly convinced you had to do that. See. Now the four cases where, mixed cases, but where the particular one is on top, right? The major premise and universal on the bottom, right? But you're in the second figure now with this arrangement where the little term is the predicate of both cases in the second slot, so to speak. So you have some A is B, or some A is not B, right? That is your major premise. But for each of those possibilities, you have two possibilities for the second premise, either universal affirmative, right? Or universal negative. Now you know right away if you have two negatives you can't have a syllogism, right? So we'd expect right away that this is not a syllogism. And we have to find examples then for A, B, and C that satisfy the two conditions. So can you think of examples for A, B, and C that satisfy those conditions?
No dog doesn't.
Yeah, or just take, just say animal and dog, right? So some animal is not a dog, right? That's true. Now you got to find two C's. You find a C that is never a dog but always an animal. Cat. You find something that is never a dog and never an animal either. So, okay. Now, that's what I preached. I said, well, let me pause now, right? Not the pause that refreshes, as they say, but the pause that helps you to avoid mistakes. Huh? If I satisfy condition number one, if the premise is true with those examples, some A is not B, some animal is not a dog. That's true, right? No C is B. No cat is a dog. That's true. No stone is a dog. I satisfy condition number one. The premises are true with those examples, right? Now we have one example where every C is A. Every cat is animal. I'll circle that. We have one example where no C is A. I'll underline that. No stone. So every cat is an animal being true once knocks out the negatives as being true always, right? And no stone is an animal being true once. Universal negative knocks out the two affirmatives, right? So everything's knocked out. They're all killed, right? There's no affirmative, no negative statement, it's always so. Therefore there's none that's necessarily so. Therefore there's not a syllogism, right? Okay. Now, let's go up here to some A is B, every C is B. Well, now, you can't get the set of none there, you've got no negative, right? Can you get the set of all? Well, you do have a universal affirmative statement, and nothing comes under the C. If you could turn that around and say every B is C, then you'd have some A is C, and then you turn around and say some C is A. But you can't convert universal affirmative, right? It isn't necessarily so. So conversion will not get you anything, right? So again, I figured this is not a syllogism. But I've got to prove that with my examples. Huh? So, can you find examples that satisfy the two conditions?
Dog and animal and copper stud.
So dog is A or what?
Yeah.
Since every dog is an animal, it's also true that some dog is an animal, right? And Cocker Spaniel and cat. Okay. Now I just pause and I say, have I satisfied both conditions? Well, condition number one is, are the premises true when I substitute examples? Well, some A is B, some dog is an animal, that's true. Every Cocker Spaniel is an animal, that's true. Every cat is an animal, that's true. I satisfy condition number one. Premises are true of those examples. Do I have one where every C is A? Yeah. Now, if every C is A is true once, every negative is false once, right? No negative is always the case. Do I have one universal negative? Yep. No cat is a dog. And if that's true once, there's no affirmative statement. Either every C is A or some C is A. It's true always, right? So there's nothing, affirmative or negative, that is always so. But if something were necessarily so, it would have to be always so. So if nothing is always so, nothing is necessarily so. And if the syllogism would have been necessarily so, but nothing is necessarily so. Therefore it's not a syllogism, right? Okay. Now how about this? Some A is not B, every C is B. Huh? Well, you can't get the set of all because you've got one negative, and you can't get the set of none because you don't have any universal negative, right? So I guess that that's not a syllogism myself, right? I used to, ask students in class, one of my general questions, I say, why can you show that something is not a syllogism by examples, but you can't show that it is a syllogism by examples, right? If you just stop and think about it, it's the fact that you can show by examples that something is not always so. If you have one contrary example, right? Mm-hmm. But, it's possible sometimes, to produce an infinitive example, right? If I produce, I go on producing, examples where numbers are odd forever, right? 3, 5, 7, 9, 1, forever, right? And still haven't shown that they're always odd, have I? So you have to go back to something universal that's obvious, like the set of all and the set of none, to see that the syllogism is valid, or go back to the square of opposition and so on, right? Okay. Can you find examples for A, B, and C that are going to satisfy the conditions, huh? Dog for A.
Dog, white for B.
B, white.
Animal for C.
Why don't you do the reverse there? You have every C is A, not some C is A, right?
Let me see what I do. So you end up with some dog is not white.
And you want to have diversity, like this animal
Oh,
and dogs. So you have an example of every C is A, right?
every
So some animals are not white, and some
dog is an animal. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
yeah, and some dogs are white, right?
Yep.
But now, see, not every dog is white, right? Every dog white? No. So That's not going to satisfy condition, you see.
Oh, yeah, no.
So, first you don't succeed, try again. And after a while, you know, this becomes kind of automatic, but first you're going to struggle with it, you know. And sometimes you try to satisfy, with the example of one condition, you try to match it with the other condition, right? If you took that example, say you said dog and animal, right? Okay, and then what? Let's say stone, right? Now those examples satisfy the every C and no C is a condition, right? But now I've got to see if I can figure out a B such that some animals are not it, and yet every dog is it. Every stone is it too. Kind of hard, right? You know? No.
That was like when you said something like dog and a plant or something like that. That kind of thing. Dog is the
Dog is C?
maybe B might be yeah, we look at tree, animal, dog. Let's try that.
Tree for A?
Yeah. So some tree is not an animal, that's true. Every dog is an animal, that's true.
No dog is a tree now.
Where did I do that?
You got to have one more example now.
Okay.
Something that is always an animal and always a what?
Tree.
It's a little hard to do, isn't it?
That's why everything contributes. That's 2 hours. Anyway, we gotta move along here. This is one of those things where you can't find an example.
Well, let's take habit. I'm going to take good, right?
Oh,
Some habits are not good, right? Is that true?
mm-hmm.
There are good habits and bad habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, every virtue is good, right? Every virtue is a what? Habit, if you're learning that, firm disposition. Now, can I think of another C such that every C is good, but no C is a habit? Is something that is always good, but not a habit? Beauty, okay.
God.
Yeah. Or even just take a good act, right? You know, good act. Every good act is good, right? But no good act is a habit. Huh? Habit is not the act. Huh? So then you have to stop and come up with examples, right? I don't know how I get those out of this.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that's not syllogism. How about this one down here? Well, notice you could you have a universal negative statement, no C is B, but nothing is said to be a C, right? You could convert this to no B is C, right? And you could bring down some A is B under there, right? Some A is B. And therefore some A is not C. But we're asking whether there's a conclusion that C is a subject, A is a predicate, right? And I can't convert the particular negative, right? Yeah? So I'm not going to get any conclusion with C as a subject, A as a predicate. By conversion here, right? I did my darnest, as they say, but I couldn't come up with anything, right? Unlike that one in the first, the two universal ones, we converted twice, right? Here I can't convert. Huh? They had that form which was every, A is B, no C is B, and we converted no C is B to no B is C, and then syllogized that no A is C, and we turn that around, right? But here we got a particular negative, and we can't convert that. So I think there's no syllogism here with C as a subject and A as a predicate. And I'm going to look for examples, right? So, what would you take as examples here, huh? No, ethics here, how would I do it? I could say some habit is what?
There's a virtue.
I take habit and virtue. And then what?
So head is a virtue and no vice is a virtue.
Okay, then you're getting yourself affirmative, right? Every vice is a habit, right? But no vice is a virtue. And then the other, what's the other term for C?
Stone.
What?
Stone.
Stone. No stone is a virtue, and no stone is a habit, right? So if I satisfy both conditions, some A is B, some habit is a virtue, that's true. No vice is a virtue, that's true. No stone is a virtue. I satisfy condition number one, the premises are true. And to have one example where every C is an A, yeah, circle that example, right? That knocks out the two negatives, as being always so. And then, right, universal negative, yeah? No stone is a habit, yeah? That knocks out the two affirmatives as being always so. So nothing is always so, right? Unless you want to put the either or form, right? If there's necessarily so, it's either affirmative or negative. But this shows there's no negative that is always so. This shows there's no affirmative that is always so. Therefore, there's nothing that's always so. There's nothing affirmative or negative, right? It's the statement, huh? So, how many valid forms were there in the second figure? There's none, of course, in particular.
Two in the mix.
Yeah, two in the mixed and in the first group, right? Or mixed. And two in the universal cases, right? Okay. So let's put down the four cases. Remember that. So we have no A is B, and every C is B, right? All you do is convert this, right? And you can syllogize that no C is A in the first figure, right? Then we had the one that was a little more difficult to reverse. Every A is B, and no C is B, huh? And then we converted no B is C, no C is B to no B is C, and we syllogized in the first figure that no A is a what? C, and then we converted. Right. Yeah. So no C is A. Then we had no A is B, and B is A, and by magic you're back in the first figure, right? And you can syllogize that some C is not what? A. Then you have the one that was more difficult. Every A is like B, and some C is not B. Was that it? Okay. The kind of common sense would tell you that if every A is a B, there's no exception. If you're an A, you must be a B. And some C is not a B, can that some C be an A? No, because every A is a B, right? But the way we show it vigorously is by saying that if you don't admit that it's necessary that some C is what? Not A. That isn't necessary. Then by the square of opposition, it's possible that every C might be an A, right? Right? And if every C were an A, then you add that to this, and you conclude what? That every C would be a B. That contradicts this, right? So you can't think that every C is A with these two, because every C is A with this contradicts that. So if these two are laid down, you must reject as incompatible. Cause of divorce, incompatibility. That every C is A is incompatible, right? And therefore you have to live with some C is not A, right? You see? Because they can't both be false, right? So every C is A is false, and these are true, right? Then this must be true. You see that? Now notice, in the second figure, all conclusions are negative, right? Okay. And if you compare it to the first figure you could draw a universal negative or particular negative too. But in the second figure there's two ways of drawing a universal negative, two ways of syllogizing a particular negative, right? But we say this is less powerful because power consists in being able to get a special universal conclusion, right? And here you can get only universal negative, while in the first figure you can get universal affirmative as well as universal negative. But if you add the two together, right, there's only one way to get universal affirmative, and that's in the first figure. But there's three ways of syllogizing universal negative. The one in the first figure and the two here. And those four are the most important ones to remember for all your reasoning. But there's, in the first figure, one way to syllogize a particular affirmative and one way to syllogize a particular negative, right? But here there's two ways to syllogize a particular negative, right? So just looking at the first two figures, you can say that there are one way to syllogize universal affirmative, in those two figures together, one way to syllogize a particular affirmative, right? But three ways to syllogize universal negative, and three ways to syllogize the particular negative, right? As I say, the most important cases are the three ways of syllogizing universal negative and the one way of syllogizing universal affirmative. So if a man has universal negative conclusion, you can sometimes reason backwards, right? He must be using one of these three forms, you know. But if he's got a universal affirmative conclusion, then you've got to go back to what? That's the first one. Yeah. Now, incidentally, when you're syllogizing with something individual, like for example, Socrates or God, for that matter, right? You know, a negative statement is what we'd say in a way convertible, right? Yeah. If no woman is Socrates, right? Socrates is not a woman, right? Okay. If nothing composed, if God is simple, or if God is not composed, nothing composed is God, right? And you turn around like that. But because we syllogism using only universal terms, right? It's not too hard to see, right? That if no woman is Socrates, that Socrates is not a woman, right? Or Socrates is not a woman, no woman is Socrates. If God is not composed, nothing composed is God, right? So you can turn around easily. Right? Now I guess we'll leave the third figure to next time, right? And the third figure, you'll find out, you have only particular conclusions therein, right? So they say that it's easier to syllogize the negative than the affirmative, right? And easier to syllogize the particular than the universal, right? That's what you might expect, right? We'll see that. Okay. Now, what do you see about the premises here? It's a little harder to generalize.
The major is always universal.
Yeah. But the minor
It's all four.
all four of it, right? Yeah. The major and the second figure will be universal, but the minor can be any of the four. Okay. So we're going to have the next narration, the syllogism, right? Huh? I'm not, especially I see it with women students, they say, I understood everything in the course until you started talking about A, B, and C, and then I got completely confused. But you have to, just go over these things slowly, Some people want to, get mind devices, with, Latin words, A, B, I, O, for the 4 quarters of the square position, but I never bothered with that. Every time I taught logic, I was thinking I was on the board, Put you on the spot a little bit, but rather than trying to memorize something, And sometimes people would take, when you went through the 16 in the first figure, and then we came to those universal rules, right? That the major premise has to be universal and the minor premise affirmative, right? But they'll try to make that a rule that you follow in deciding. Well, this is something you come to after you decided what's the thing, and then you make the induction. You say, there's only 4 valid forms, and in each of these ones, the major premise is universal in the first figure, and the minor premise is particular, right? It's affirmative, right? The major premise is universal, and the minor is affirmative. That's the kind of thing you induce after you've gone through the 16, So you don't make that the rule by which you decide. But later on, you can bear that in mind if you want to, We shall see you.
Some books will talk about distribution, and they'll say whether it's just, distribution. They'll give rules about whether the predicate is distributed.
Yeah, but it's universal, not the same thing. Spread out over all of them, or just some of them, right? See, Thomas is, you still guys in theology, you use the second figure an awful lot, because you're syllogising that God is not something, right?
Yeah.
We won't be able to meet next week. We're having a community meetings, the 11th, 12th, 13th next week.
Okay, so we'll meet 2 weeks from now, I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give you enough time to forget all about the syllogism.
And we'll go over this again. One more time. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I noticed that when after we learned it, then when we did St. Thomas, then Father McGovern would always make us get the syllogism.
Yeah.
You saw the second figure, universal negative.
Yeah. They say, like, when I teach the philosophy of nature, and we show in the first book of Natural Hearing that what changes is composed, right?
Okay.
Everything that changes is composed, and you really kind of see that clearly if you follow that. And then we say that in theology, after you show that God is simple, meaning not composed, right?